Alright, so now let's talk about moral relativism. To start with, I'm just going to state my position flat out. Morality is not relative to the society in which you live. At least not in the simple sense that so many apologists would claim that it would be without a God. This idea is a bit more challenging to deal with philosophically than the last three and will thus require more thought. It's true that morals are relative in the sense that whether an action is right or wrong depends entirely on the consequences of the action, which might be different in different societies. I mean, for example, premarital sex may be wrong in an environment where there is no contraception, but in an environment where there is, it doesn't do the same amount of harm, and thus, because the circumstances are different, the morality of the action may also be different. But this form of relativism would still allow for more general principles to be used in ethical decisions, and it wouldn't really matter what social structure is in place to figure out which principles seem to make the most sense in terms of what has the best consequences. No, the kind of relativism I would disagree with is the position that moral judgments are nothing more than cultural customs passed down from generation to generation, and that one is no more valid than another. This form of relativism was used, for example, by Marxists to declare that the so-called objective moralities of their societies were really just the moral ideas of the ruling class. But when the Marxists espoused that view, they then had a problem. From the point of view that every moral system is just as valid as any other, if you take communism as a social structure, that view leads you to conclude that communism is no more valid morally than any other social system, including capitalism. I mean, the distinction between siding with the proletariat and siding with the bourgeoisie is really only a cultural distinction, right? So if moral relativism was, in this sense, was actually valid, we would have no reason to choose one over the other. Marx's co-author, Friedrich Engels, abandoned this form of equivalence relativism, I'll call it, and simply made a descriptive statement that in societies with class systems, the morality tended to benefit the ruling class. However, the morality of communism would be superior in some sense because it would not have these class distinctions, and therefore it would be a really human morality. So, the view that one moral system is no more or less valid than another also allows us to dispense with ordinary ethical relativism, and not just the kind of relativism that Marxists tended to espouse. It's clear upon reflection that what we view as moral, and what society dictates, though there may be a good deal of overlap between them, in some areas more than others, obviously, the two are not identical. The view that morality is relative to each particular society is also problematic, because it gives us no way to resolve moral arguments between different societies. Each society has its view, both are right by definition, and there's nothing to argue about when determining, for example, whether slavery is moral. One society says it's right, one society says it's wrong. They are both correct in their statements. There is another reason why I would reject moral relativism that is admittedly a bit more self-serving, but I think it's accurate as well. according to this view that morality is based completely on the society in which you live, unpopular moral ideas would have to be, by definition, wrong. If a minority opinion is held, that opinion is wrong, because the majority has a different opinion, and what the majority says is morality. So that means that anyone seeking to change their society's moral views, for example, trying to argue that bestiality can be practiced in a moral way, would by definition be wrong because most people don't agree with them. And I just don't think that the number of people who agree with a particular sentiment has anything to do with whether that sentiment is correct or incorrect. So yes, that is a bit of a self-serving reason to reject moral relativism, but that is how I feel about it. So, too bad. On a related note, I'd like to argue that ethics is not merely a matter of subjective taste or opinion. This is similar to the relativist argument, but it's slightly different, because in the form of relativism that we were discussing earlier, ethics was relative to the society in which a person lived. Whereas in this view, which I'll call subjectivism, it's relative to the individual making the moral judgment. But this naive form of subjectivism, which states basically that all ethical judgments by individuals are equally valid, still gives us no way to resolve ethical disputes between people, since by definition, in this case, all that one claims when stating that something is right or wrong would be that they agree or disagree with it. If one person agrees with it and the other disagrees, they're both correct. There are, however, other forms of subjectivism which don't have this problem. For example, one might say that morals can be seen as expressions of emotional attitudes. In a moral theory called emotivism, that's basically what this is. Morality has to do with our feelings on particular actions, whether we feel elated at their prospect, disgusted, whatever we feel. Or morality might be taken as a series of prescriptions for given actions. Or it is possible that although we do have the descriptive language to say that morality is objective, we are simply wrong to do so. That morality is, in some sense, irrevocably subjective, even if not in this naive sense of everybody's right. Those subtler forms of subjectivism would also still allow for rational debate over ethical questions, though of course these theories might disagree on how large a role reason needs to play in such debates. The use of reason on ethical questions also needs to be justified, though. So in the next video, I will discuss one possible way of deriving an ethical system rationally. It's a very broad system, and frankly, without serious development, it's useless. But it is at least a starting point.